I'm Chazan Dr. Ramon Tassad, and Tape with Rabbi Doug is next.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight. But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're going to see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about that.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. My guest today is Rabbi Dr. Rabbi Mirelman. Welcome to the show. So nice to have you with me. I've known him for years and always wanted to have him on the show, and today is the day. He is a native of Argentina, grew up in Buenos Aires. He was active in Jewish youth movement in Camp Ramah. He attended University of Buenos Aires, got his master's degree in mathematics, went to New York City, went to JTS, was ordained as a rabbi in 1969. Attended Columbia University, got his master's degree and his PhD in political science, concentrating in Jewish history. He is a Jewish historian. Amazing information, and the things he knows are things that a lot of people I couldn't even imagine would know beside you. He was invited to teach at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Met his wife, who was a native of the Netherlands. And the two of them were in Congregation B'nai Israel in 1989. And he was a professor also of history at JTS. Eventually, in 1990, he became the rabbi of West Suburban Har Zion and River Forest, a congregation which is still a thriving congregation, probably the most thriving congregation south of Chicago, certainly. And southwest of Chicago. He is an authority on Latin American Jewry, and he has written this book, Jewish Buenos Aries, 1890 to 1930, In Search of an Identity. You know that this is an academic book because the print is so small, I need glasses to read it, and if the print was bigger, it would be 3 times as thick. But it is such an interesting book, and he's an interesting person, and I'm so glad to have you on the show. First of all, let me ask you this. Here you are, a young boy growing up in Argentina. Was Judaism thriving in Argentina when you were a young boy? What was life like for the Jewish communities where you grew up?
Well, as a young boy, basically a lot of the people were secular. Most of the congregations were Orthodox or going in that direction. But around the end of the 50s, there was an influx of the Jewish Theological Seminary and conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism. So then a variety of expressions of Judaism came into the fore.
I've always been under the impression that the Jewish communities in Argentina, even if they weren't religious, kept kosher. That people were very much going to kosher butchers and buying, kosher meat, and even if they weren't very religious. Was there that traditional feeling in growing up?
Well, I wouldn't say that. There were the observant Jews who went to the kosher butchers and so on. A lot of the people were less observant.
So a lot of people who came to Argentina, they were refugees that came out before the Holocaust, and the Jewish community grew during at the beginning of the war of World War II in Argentina. Tell me this: was there a feeling of these people, which a lot of them are gone, of course, today because of their age? Are there survivors groups and children of survivors groups in Argentina because so many did come there?
Yes, there are. But I would say, Doug, that a lot of Jews started to come to Argentina earlier. Some even, as my book goes, from 1890 to 1930. And there was, by 1930, there were 120,000 Jews in Buenos Aires already. It got to its peak by the end of the 50s when close to 500,000 Jews lived in the whole country. It was a huge community, not compared to the US, but after that, Argentina was a very important community in numbers.
Now, this book you wrote a number of years ago, not while you were living in Argentina, while you were living here in the United States.
I started, it's a development from my PhD dissertation for Columbia University in New York. And I went to archives in Buenos Aires, archives in Jerusalem, for example, the Zionist archives, the workers' movement archives, even the YIVO in New York City has quite a bit of information on Argentinian Jewry.
Wow. So that's what I wanted to ask you, is how you did your research.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. And did you speak Ladino, the what people would know as the Sephardic Yiddish? Ladino is a Spanish Jewish language. Did you speak Ladino when you were
Actually,
growing up?
on my mother's side, I'm Sephardic, so I'm a son of a mixed marriage. My mother was born in Turkey. Her maiden name was Toledo, which is a very Sephardic
name.
And so with my grandmother, who came to Buenos Aires as an older person, we spoke this funny sounding Spanish, which is Ladino. So I picked up a lot of Ladino. On my father's side, he picked up Yiddish somewhere along his life.
And where was your father born?
He was born in Switzerland, from East European Jews. You know, his father was from Poland and the Ukraine and so on, eventually settled in Switzerland, and my father was the 8th of 8 children. 6 of them were born in Eastern Europe, and 2 of them in Switzerland. So he picked up Yiddish, but we couldn't speak Yiddish in the house. I had to learn Yiddish in order to do a lot of my research because...
Wow, so you actually had to learn Yiddish as part of your academic studies to be able to do the research.
Right.
That's an amazing
because
thing.
Buenos Aires was such a big center for Jewish printing. Books that...
Sfarim, Jewish Sfarim.
Sfarim, and also a lot of other topics in Yiddish. It was a little cheaper to publish in Buenos Aires than in New York. So, and in the 1940s, for example, in Buenos Aires, there were 3 Yiddish dailies appearing every day.
Wow.
And the Yiddish theater was rampant. There were 3 or 4 ensembles.
Did famous people like Molly Picon, did she travel to Argentina and sing?
All the big stars from New York came to Argentina because the seasons are reversed.
Right.
So when it's summer here, they went to Argentina and spent 2-3 months during the season in Buenos Aires. Sometimes they went to the hinterland, especially to the Jewish agricultural colonies that were developed in the wet pampas of Argentina with the Jewish gauchos, which is an interesting aspect of that community as well.
What do you think from 1890 to 1930 in your research was the most eye-opening events and historical monumental things in the Jewish community that really made you want to get this book out?
No. Well, it was the field of my research. I wanted to concentrate on that period because my family came towards the end of that period. So I didn't want to involve my father and my uncles who were active in the Jewish community after that. But that formative period of the Jewish immigrants and so on was very important because people say now Argentina, they are dictators. People remember Perón and Evita and other juntas, you know. But up to 1930, there were no revolutions in Argentina. It was a pacific transmission of power from one administration to the next. Argentina was considered the US of South America, a country with a lot of future development economically and culturally. Buenos Aires is a very European-looking city, a lot of French influence, in addition to Spanish and Italian, no? But the contribution of several different foreign communities, European communities, and the Jews were attracted to that because of some interesting developments. In the 1880s, for example, Argentina, that had a Spanish tradition of the Inquisition during colonial times, started to change its traditions. The generation of the 1880s, as it's called now in retrospect, changed the method of education, and they decreed that education will now be free, universal, and secular. So it was an important change from the education which was in the hands of the Catholic Church. Now it became secularized. So it was a very important factor that attracted Jews to that country.
Are part of the community there and the growth of the community, did it include what people refer to as Marrano Jews, people who during the Inquisition, the same year that Columbus came to America, the Jews were expelled from Spain, and did a lot of them come for a while? They stayed there acting Christian, so that they would not be expelled, and then they left, and they had these traditions. Some returned to Judaism, some stayed Christian, but had these Jewish traditions in their homes that were passed down from generation to generation. Were there Marrano Jews living in Argentina during this time?
There were a few, and they resurfaced much later. All throughout Latin America, we find groups of local people who have been reared in the Christian church, Catholic mainly, but some Protestant churches as well, who think they have some Jewish blood in their veins. Actually, I've been mentoring a group in El Salvador in Central America for about 8 years. I teach them once a week on Skype, and I've visited them twice.
Wow.
And it's a group that they were all raised as Catholics, but eventually converted. It's a small group, about 12 families, and some keep adding to their numbers.
These people think or have evidence that they have Jewish blood in them, that they
some do and some do not, but they are very, very much interested in learning. They study Midrash, they study Talmud in Spanish, of course, but they follow the rites and the rituals very, very accurately. So it's a pleasure to help them out in the last 8 years.
Just amazing. There are two subjects that I want to touch on, and I want to go in chronological order, and that is the bombing of the JCC in Buenos Aires, which took place. What year was that?
It was 92 and 94.
92 and 94 were the two terror
One was on the Israeli embassy,
right,
and then the AMIA.
And the JCC. Right. Yeah. So, do you think that has lasting effect today in the Jewish community? Obviously, I want to talk about next after that also the Rabbi Dovid, the chief rabbi in Buenos Aires, who was robbed and beaten critically, and just recently, and though the show's airing weeks later, it's still going to be recent in everyone's memories. A terrible thing, and we wish him a refuah shlema, a complete and speedy recovery. Do you think that these things have had a tarnishing effect on the people in the Jewish community, where people are saying, I don't feel safe anymore, I want to leave Buenos Aires, I want to leave Argentina? Or do you think that the people are nationalists and Am Yisrael Chai, wherever we are, we're going to stay strong? How do you think it is?
You find both expressions. There is anti-Semitism in Argentina, as there is, unfortunately, throughout the world. There is a certain tradition that there was more anti-Semitism in Argentina than in other places, because during the war, Argentina was ruled by a junta, and the junta had certain feelings for Germany. But eventually, Argentina joined the Allies towards the end of it. But there's also the story that several Nazi criminals settled in South America, some in Brazil, some in Argentina. Eichmann, who is perhaps the biggest
I was
fish
going to bring
among...
that up next, actually.
Yeah. And I remember that day. It was the 150th anniversary of the Argentinian independence. And Abba Eban came in an El Al plane.
He was the foreign minister of Israel at the time,
minister.
right?
He, you know, El Al didn't travel to Argentina, but this was the one time, and the plane came back with Eichmann that was captured.
The Mossad Secret Service of Israel was on that plane, and they actually kidnapped him as a Nazi war criminal and brought him back to Israel for trial.
That's right. And it caused a lot of ruptures. At that time, there was a civilian government in Argentina. It was very friendly, but Argentina had to break relations with Israel because actually the Mossad had taken Eichmann out of the country illegally. Otherwise, he might have been tried in Argentina. It wouldn't have had the same impact.
Now, there are those historians who say Hitler didn't really die in his bunker, that he came to Argentina. There are those stories. There are certainly many others, as you mentioned, of Nazi criminals that came to Argentina under aliases. Do you think, although most of them probably aren't alive still, but there are certainly some that are, do you think that there are still people out there and people are looking for them still in Argentina?
I don't think Hitler made it.
No.
A few, Klaus Barbie was captured, I think, in Bolivia, and others were found or killed in Brazil. But there are pockets of Nazi influence. Actually, the immigration of Germans throughout the world was an important factor too, and there are pockets of descendants of Germans who still have that type of feeling, and there are some secret societies here and there, but I don't think they make a huge impact. There is anti-Semitism, but there also is the counter forces that befriend the Jews and have cordial relations with the State of Israel, and they decry the things that happened with the bombing of the Amia and the embassy. But on the other hand, those bombings have never been resolved.
No, they haven't.
There is a strong, almost 100% sure connection with Iran. But, you know, it's still in limbo.
You still have your relatives living in Argentina?
I have relatives. I have two sisters and their families. I have a lot of cousins. We were a big family on both sides of my parents.
Very nice. What would you say if someone said, you know, what do you love about Buenos Aires? What do you love about Argentina still today that would bring you back there if you had the opportunity? What is it about Argentina and Buenos Aires? I know, you know, my wife says if not going to Israel, if I had another country to go and visit the Jewish community, she would like to go to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, and see the Jewish community because it's so historic and so old. What would you say is the thing that would bring people there now who are Jewish and in the past, you know, from 1890 to 1930? What was that true attraction that is still beautiful today?
Well, being born and raised in Buenos Aires, you know, you always have a warm spot in your heart for those 20-some years. And I visit all the time, sometimes for happy occasions, sometimes for sad occasions, of course. But the city is a beautiful city. It has a lot to offer culturally. In every aspect, the people are educated. The Jewish community has thrived. Of course, there's assimilation, but there are synagogues throughout the city and its suburbs of all different streams of Judaism. There's a lot of publication of books. Actually, my book came out in Spanish at the same time.
Oh, very nice.
I didn't write it in Spanish. I had
Somebody
it translated.
translated it.
Yes, but it is every now and then I hear somebody, oh, I read your book, from people who live there. But it is an attractive city, and the country is beautiful. It's a very big country. It goes all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, which is the southernmost tip of South America, where the Strait of Magellan is, the glaciers, and then you go north and you have tropical areas, the lakes and the Andes. It's a beautiful country. There's also, for the Jewish visitor, not only Buenos Aires is interesting, but as I mentioned before, the agricultural colonies in the provinces of Entre Rios and Santa Fe and a few others. They were groups of Jews that came in the 1890s and later and established agricultural colonies and eventually prospered.
Beautiful.
Their descendants now went to the big cities, most of them, but the relics, the shuls there, the libraries, the records that they have, and there's a lot of history there.
That's just.
It's a unique
amazing
phenomenon. They call them the Jewish gauchos, the Jewish cowboys of the Pampas.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. So I wanted to ask this question, and it was also on my mind. Now, just like we here in the United States, you know, there are connections in the Jewish communities, such as Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Miami. We have connections all the way through in the United States, even going like Toronto and Montreal. There's a North American connection between the Jewish communities. Is it like that in South America? Like, do you have with Panama, which has a strong Jewish community, and in Brazil with the strong Jewish community? Are there connections in the South American Jewish communities like that?
Yes, there is a confederation of communities. First of all, in Argentina. At one time, there were more than 100 communities throughout the country. But the little ones sort of disappeared or were consolidated in the larger cities because the big cities attract people.
Sure.
And Buenos Aires was like a huge magnet, you know, that attracted the people. But also throughout Latin America, there are confederations of Jews, like the World Jewish Congress has its Latin American sniff or branch, you know, and the rabbis in the Latin American territories also have their regional meetings every now and then. So there is a connection.
And so let me ask you this, because you probably know this best of all. Has Chabad come into Argentina, into the smaller Jewish communities, like they have in the small
all over.
All over.
Yes.
So you can find really rabbis all over the country where there are Jews.
Chabad actually is supported by a few wealthy people, and of course they have the rabbis and the shlichim, you know, their emissaries all over. But there is one thing that is unique to Argentina. There are kosher McDonald's in Israel and one in Buenos Aires.
Really?
None
Nowhere
all over
else
the world.
in
Nowhere else.
this hemisphere. Wow.
No,
that's
not
amazing.
all over the world. I
No,
think
just
it's
Israel. Just in Israel.
Right. McDonald's, because
kosher McDonald's.
it's in Jewish area of Buenos Aires. There are several Jewish areas, but
I'm not sure that there are too many outside of the kosher Subway. The other one's closed, but the one in Cleveland. I'm not sure there are many other non-kosher restaurants that have kosher branches in the whole Western Hemisphere.
Right.
So that's an amazing story. I didn't know that.
But I think the Chabad influence in that. I think it is a direct influence of Chabad.
Very
but there are Chabad is all over, and they publish their very slick brochures in Spanish and throughout the country.
Is Rabbi Dovidovich, I want to go back to who we wish again a refuah shlema, a speedy recovery after his terrible incident of being attacked and robbed. This anti-Semitic incident is just something that shakes the world, the Jewish world. Is the chief rabbi in Argentina, is he a public official? Or is it something that only the Jewish community connects to and elects?
No, the chief rabbi is basically the rabbi of the AMIA, which is the Confederation of Ashkenazi Jewish Institutions. It's very interesting that in Argentina you have one big Ashkenazi community and 4 small Sephardi communities.
Really?
Sephardim are about 15% of the
and
Jews.
It's interesting, that's unusual because in most Spanish-speaking communities, you have more Sephardim than you do Ashkenazim, and it's just the opposite down here.
Yeah, well, the Ashkenazi migration was very important. I like to use a remark by a Colombian historian many, many decades ago who said the Jews of Latin America are the new Sephardim. They came from Ashkenazi roots, but now, after 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 generations, they're fluent in Spanish. They are members of their respective countries. They have roots in those countries. They root for their country in the World Cup, which is a very important thing.
That's a big thing.
And they know their literature, their history, and so on, and they write and speak Spanish. So basically, what's a Sephardi? A Sephardi is a person imbued of the Spanish and Portuguese culture. So, in a way, these people with Ashkenazi names are the new Sephardim.
Very nice. Well, I can't thank you enough for being on the show today. This was so interesting, and I'd love to talk more on a future occasion, and this has been so enlightening as well. I know you're retired from being a pulpit rabbi, but you're certainly not retired. You're still still doing your academic studies, you're still doing your teaching. And
I teach at Spertus.
And teach at Spertus College of Judaica, Spertus University in Chicago. It's an amazing, wonderful thing that people can learn from you, because you are so knowledgeable. You may be the first Jewish historian that I have ever known to have such knowledge of South America, certainly, and I can't thank you enough. Your book, Jewish Buenos Aires, 1890 to 1930, In Search of an Identity, is so interesting. If you, our viewers, want to know more about Rabbi Dr. Victor Mirelman, you can email us at info@tvrabbi.com. I will send him that email, and I know he'll get back to you personally. Remember, you can check out our website, www.tvrabbi.com, where you can also see former shows on the web. I want to thank my guest again, Rabbi Dr. Victor Mirelman, and hope to see you all next time.
He's the rabbi for me. Anytime you need, you're gonna get married or you're gonna die. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug.
This has been a Taped with Rabbi Doug production.